Good morning. I'm going to read my script here because I do better at that than ad-lib usually. This is the 2011 CALLERLAB Convention, and this is Las Vegas, Nevada, and today is Tuesday, April 19th, 2011. This is the How People Learn session, and we are very pleased and glad that you are with us today. My name is Jerry Reed. I'm from Rockledge, Florida, and I will be the moderator for this session. With us on the panel, we have Dottie Welch from Lawrencetown, Nova Scotia, Canada. Dottie is also chairman of the Choreographic Applications Committee. A nice welcome for Dottie. And on my far left, Mike Callahan from Spencerport, New York. Mike is also chairman of the Calling in Schools Committee. A nice hand for Mike. I and both Dottie and Mike are very interested in teaching and ensuring and trying to help ensure that people learn whatever it is that we are trying to teach them. In most cases with us, this group, it would be teaching square dancing and those related things that sometimes we feel we might not have time to get to, such as the history and the styling and those things that go along with that. This session is being recorded. We have a wireless mic. And there's also a wired mic. So we will be using just the wireless mic here. Tim, in the last session, said that it worked very well for them, that if you have a question, to just make your way up to the front. That way we don't have to get the microphone back to the group. If you feel comfortable with that, that's fine. If you don't feel comfortable with that, just raise your hand and we will get the microphone to you. If I could have a volunteer of the first three that would do that, thank you very much. This session is intended to help you become aware of how learning styles differ and how different people learn in different ways. We also hope to help make you and your teaching more effective so that you can reach and teach a wide variety of dancers and students and different learning styles which you will encounter in your classes. This information will be helpful no matter what dance program you teach. In fact, this information will benefit any teacher in any situation. As I mentioned, there are handouts. If you don't have one, you can come up and pick one of those up. If we run out of handouts, Mike has one, Dottie has one, and I have my stack over here. If we run out of handouts, I would ask that you put your name on a list, and I will email you the handouts. I'll email you all three of them. I'll send you a PDF file with all three of them in there. It has been said by myself, and I believe many others, that teaching is the most important thing we do as callers. You're quite all right. Anytime, Ruth. Is that the end of it? Okay. I'll have a list up here for people to after the session for people to sign in to get copies of the presentation. Even if you've got a copy and you would like a PDF, put your name on the list with your email, and I'll send you a PDF file with all three. Yes, sir. Quite possibly, it might be harder to find than if I send it to you personally. I'll start over. It has been said by many learned people, including myself. That's a joke, by the way. I'll tell you what, my jokes, I think, are quite good. There are some differing opinions. So if I don't get a joke reaction, I may let you know that that's a joke. All right, thank you. The best one I like that people do not like is why the long face. Anybody know the why the long face? I digress. This horse walked into a bar. Says, I need a drink. And the bartender, having empathy with all of his customers, looked at the horse and said, why the long face? The joke was not, the follow-up was. So that's entertainment. I will try to start again. It has been said that teaching is one of the most important things we do as callers. It has also been said that effective teaching can be one of the most difficult things we do. Many callers simply teach the way they were taught. This can be either good or bad. I believe that we can learn to teach better. I know I learn something new from every class I teach, no matter what program that is. There's also a related handout that is on the CALLERLAB website. It's called Teaching Techniques that I would encourage you to take a look at as well. I'm going to briefly go through some of the points that I have and then turn it over to Dottie, and then Mike will finish us up. I believe that there are 4 learning styles. I believe that different people learn different ways, primarily. We probably all learn with all of them, but for most people, there is a dominant way that we learn, or perhaps 2 dominant ways. One is by observing or watching. That would be a demo square or demo couple. I use demo couples a lot. The second is by listening, as we are doing now. Third is by reading, which Dottie tells me that is her primary style. And finally, by doing. Now, people learn to do something different from the way that they learn to know something. I believe that in order to learn to do something, you have to physically do whatever that task is. While learning to learn something can be done by some of the other processes, primarily listening to a lecture, perhaps, or by reading the material. On my handout, I go through various illustrations of all of those things, and so I will not read through the entire handout. Everybody say, praise the Lord. But again, just in conclusion, there are those 4 primary learning styles, and our goal as teachers, instructors, is to train the dancers to be able to comfortably enter the local dance activity. I believe it's important to note that I do not believe it is our job to train the dancers to dance every move from every possible position. I believe it is our job to train the dancers to enter the local dance activity when they end their class session, and over time will become more and more proficient. Their proficiency will grow to where they want it to be. If they want it to be such that they can dance with any group, anywhere, they might dance 3 or 4 times a week, or do more study, or get videos. If their goal is to attend a local club dance, then their proficiency will grow to allow them to do that comfortably. Their goal may be to attend that local dance 1 tip, spend the rest of the evening visiting with their friends. That used to offend me, because I thought they were not dancing because they didn't like the way that I called. I couldn't believe that there was anybody that didn't like the way I called. But it did offend me. I said, they come to this dance to listen to me. Why are they sitting there? But as I aged, I came to realize that the social aspects of this activity are so powerful that there are people who will come to a dance and not dance at all. And yet they have a wonderful time because they visit with their friends. I called for one club one time. We had 2-3 squares. I would put the record on, and it would play through the entire record. And I'd have 2 couples on the floor. And I'd pick it up, and I'd start it over. Halfway through, I'd have a square, and then would start dancing. It really frustrated me until I realized the reason those people were at that dance was not to listen to me. They were there to visit their friends. And when I realized that, it made my blood pressure go down. And I enjoyed myself a lot more because I was able to recognize why they were there. Anyway, and again, one of the reasons for our teaching, our training, is so that the dancers can respond properly to the calls they hear from the formations and arrangements that they hear are most likely to encounter. I believe that teaching is very important and must be done well. We've all heard the statement that practice makes perfect. I have another long story about an elderly gentleman who took class with me, and I would say to him, John, you know that, because he was worried about learning, I would say, John, you know that practice makes perfect. And he would say, Jerry, that's not quite right. Practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So we need to ensure that when we first introduce things, using these various methods that we're going to be talking about, that they learn it properly, because unlearning something is extremely difficult. Any comments about what we've covered so far, except the long-faced joke? We don't want to get into that. With no further ado, then, a nice hand for Dottie Welch.
Okay, so you have among the things in front of you one that says Learning Styles for Dancing. And when Jerry and Mike and I were talking about how we were going to approach this, we each had kind of our own view of what learning styles or how people learn actually means. I come to this having a degree in teaching and a lot of experience teaching in schools and universities, as well as more than 25 years of calling, teaching as a background. Out of that, learning to teach through the school system, way back when I got my degree, they didn't have as much knowledge as they do now about how people actually learn. And what I'm going to address today is some of the various models that have been developed as to the different ways that people learn, the different things that are happening. And for me, over the years, I've seen this. It was wonderful when I actually had found a book that itemized this, kind of categorized it properly. And I'll tell you in the back of the handout, there's a reference there. The book was The Way They Learn. I'm not sure if it's still available, but it very well may be. I was sent to this book by coming to one of the CALLERLAB meetings years back that Mike Jacobs and John Marshall put on about the same topic. And I was fascinated by what they were saying and said, okay, I've got to get this book and read it myself, which I have done. And what you're getting here is a condensation of some of the information out of that book, as well as what I've experienced myself over the years. So I'm going to start with something that I was taught years and years ago, and that's this matter of motivation. And this leads directly from something that Jerry was saying about, okay, he's got dancers coming who dance one tip and they spend the rest of the evening socializing. What's their motivation for being there? Socialization. Okay. What about the dancer? The other scenario where these dancers are eager beavers and they want to go on and they want to learn plus and they want to learn advanced and they want to go out and they want to dance here and they want to dance there. What's their motivation? Achievement. Callers. A lot of you. What is your motivation for being up there with the microphone? I don't know. Power. Control. It's worth thinking about that. Or maybe you're up here with a microphone, and it isn't really power and control. It's truly achievement. It's the desire for everybody to learn and do better and so forth. But having some information about yourself and the people you're working with, kind of seeing what it is that's motivating them, helps you reach out to them in the appropriate ways, understand what's going on, not being upset by what you're seeing and taking offense, because they're just different. Okay, so that's one thing. That's the motivation side of it. Then we come to the Gregork models of learning styles. So this is one person's research, probably with assistance, but into how some people might think. And the first thing is we're talking about how people perceive things. Now, I'm going to get down and personal and ask you. So when we get through this first little section, I'm going to ask you which category you think you belong in. So the first category is the person who perceives things in a concrete way. This mind is most comfortable registering information directly through the five senses of sight, smell, touch, taste, and hearing. Prefers to deal with the tangible and obvious, as opposed to the abstract person who is most comfortable using the intellect to conceive ideas and using intuition and the imagination to look beyond what is obvious to understand the more subtle implications. Okay. How many think they have a concrete mind? How many think they have an abstract mind? About 50-50. And that's what I usually find with this. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now let's go to the ordering question. Sequential. This mind prefers to organize information in a linear, step-by-step manner, to follow a logical train of thought, and to have a plan and follow it. As opposed to the random. This mind prefers to organize information by chunks, with no particular sequence. This type may skip steps or begin at the middle or end and work backward to achieve the desired result. How many think they're sequential? How many think they're random? Again, about 50-50. All right, and what he does is put them together. So he says, if you were a concrete sequential person, then, I'm not going to read all, but the things that kind of jump out at me as very relevant to what we're doing. They want facts. They work step by step. They pay attention to details, and they interpret literally. If you say, take 3 steps and then step on the 3rd step and turn a quarter, they're going to do exactly that. Okay? Concrete random. Learn only what is necessary. Discard all this other stuff that might seem irrelevant at the moment. Down the road, it might be important, but at the moment, it's irrelevant, so it's gone. Use insight and instinct. Different kind of person. They're going to pick out of what you're teaching different kinds of things. Abstract sequential. Want exact, correct information. Use logical reasoning. Abstract random. Want broad general principles. Ask for advice. Consider others' feelings. Different. People are going to react differently to what you're saying. They're going to go in a different direction with it. They're going to take a different part of it. And if you're aware, perhaps, that you are a concrete sequential person and you're teaching an abstract random student, you will realize that, ooh, I got to be careful about how I present this, because what seems right, the right way for me, is not necessarily going to be the right way for them. Okay. Notice here, let me see, I'll make notes in the next set. Okay, on the next page, this first section here is, to me, probably the most important part of this as far as square dance calling is concerned and square dance teaching is concerned. I'm talking about, in one way, the same thing Jerry was, where he says people learn by observing, they learn by listening, they learn by reading, they learn by doing. These have been divided up into 3 categories, so the reading and observing kind of lands in one. Visual learners, and they think, research shows that about 65% of the population are visual learners. They primarily gather information by sight. They tend to say, this is a very interesting thing, they tend to say, I see whatever they're trying to understand. They take detailed notes. How many of you are taking detailed notes? Some? Yes, some. Learn well from diagrams, pictures, and written information. Like to read for themselves rather than be read to. Okay? Think about this one. So I'm going to ask again about these. Auditory learners, 30% of the population, primarily gather information by hearing. Tend to say, I hear whatever. Listen first. Take notes after or at all. Learn well from the spoken word and tend to look up or down or close their eyes when trying to absorb information because they want to shut out the visual environment. And they're putting it in their head. And then the third kind is kinesthetic or tactile learners, 5% of the population. Primarily gather information through touch and movement, or tend to say, I feel how this goes. Tend to watch the teacher very closely. And I'm not kidding about that. I taught mathematics. I'm writing on the blackboard. I've got equations. And I've got one or two students in the room that are just glued to me. And then before I knew about this, I'm thinking, is there a spot on my shirt? Jam on my chin? What's going on here? Why? They were focused on me all the time. It's the nature of the way they learn. And once I clued into that, okay, fine, this is cool. As long as they're learning and as long as this is working, that's fine by me. Need a self-determined learning environment. Friends with children that they can't understand why they can't sit at their desk with their light and do their homework. They're active, they're twitchy, they're itchy. They're kinesthetic learners. They have to create something that works for them. They sort things by putting them on the stairs and running up and down the stairs to sort them out. If it works, it works. Exceptionally good at learning skills by imitation and practice. Need physical information, so they want to know how it feels to do something. And here's a very important piece of information. Since each different formation and position when they're learning square dancing feels different, these dancers must experience a move in every position that they are expected to dance it. Initially, your reaction to this is, why is it taking them so long to learn this? Well, if you aren't very careful about presenting it in one position for them until they've got it, before you go on to the next position until they've got it, their universe becomes very confused. I had somebody like this. I was teaching advanced. Cast a shadow was awful until I clued in to the fact that he was a kinesthetic learner. And I had to pay very close attention to, okay, he's the man in the middle facing out. And get him through that over and over until he was comfortable with it. Now let me put him in another position. You need to be aware of what's going on out there. Now, it's only 5% of the population that do that. So you might teach several classes before you run into somebody that learns that way. But if you have a student that's struggling with what everybody else seems to be accomplishing easily, think about, watch what they're doing. Maybe they are a kinesthetic learner, and they have got to experience each position separately, not all intermixed, until they've got it. And Mike Jacobs used to say this about his mother. She was a kinesthetic learner, so he knew darn well what this all meant. Okay, how many of you think you're visual learners? How many think you're auditory learners? How many think you're kinesthetic learners? And we've got a few. Okay? So definitely. Now, you may actually have, one obvious leaning and then a second that you're not too uncomfortable with. So, Very important that if you are a visual learner, you take into consideration what the auditory learner needs and the kinesthetic learner needs, and so forth and so on. So everything you say has to be addressed to each of those. Okay. Last one here, really. This Witkin model of approaches to understanding. We have analytic and we have global. And I'm just going to pick out a few matters here. First one, the analytic focuses on details versus global. Focus on the overall picture. All right. What is the implication there? Very interesting experience I had at Caller School. I was working with Norm Wilcox. Two of us are both analytical. We had a student who was clearly global. Okay. The analytic person focuses on the details first and then looks at the global picture afterwards. And the global does it in the reverse order. So when we were talking about learning, our tendency is, all right, let's describe this move carefully, and then at the end of it, they'll see the grand picture. We have the student who gets down there and starts saying, okay, at the end of the right and left through, you're going to be over on the other side facing in the opposite direction. And really going into 3 or 4 more sentences that to us was, I don't care about this right now. But the student did. And some of her students did that she was teaching. So unless you're aware of the fact that some people need that kind of information at the beginning, we wouldn't have given it. She did. We discarded it. Okay, that's okay. If you don't need it at that point, you can just ignore it. But if you do need it, it's very important that you have it. Okay? Going on. Analytic can ignore distractions while the global is easily distracted. So what else is going on around them in the room? This is important. Wants a way to evaluate quality versus avoids individual competition. Wants to correct mistakes. Takes criticism personally. Do you or do you not say, please do this, you're in the wrong spot? Some people want it, others do not, and you have to learn who is comfortable with this and who doesn't really want to hear it, and how do I get things, for the betterment of everybody, get everybody in the same place. And you have to be careful. Some people get really upset if you correct them in any way, and others are quite happy to say, oh, right, I should be over there, and it's no sweat. And you need to learn. Okay, last page here. These are kind of other things. Things that all of us are affected by. Sound. Are you good with quiet, or do you need music and rhythm? Do you teach with the music on? Do you teach with it off? What's best? We need light. Okay, I think that's kind of a universal. We've got to have light to avoid eye strain, but we don't want it to be too bright. Heat. How many of you are shivering? Yeah. Is that affecting your concentration a little bit? Yes. Okay. Food. Is the stomach growling? Time of day. You've all heard about morning people and night owls. When is your class? Is it at a good time or a bad time for your students? Left-handed versus right-handed. Why are they having trouble with square through? Or why can they not turn to the right? Always turn the wrong direction. Maybe it's because it's the other hand. Tall versus short. Tall guy, you can see what's going on out there. Why did I stand up at the beginning of this? Because I want to see to the back of the hall, and I can't do that if I'm sitting down. Why might I have trouble sight calling? Because I can't see over the heads of the square in front of me unless I'm up on the stage. What about the dancer, the short woman? She can't see beyond the guy in front of her to know that she's supposed to be doing something with the people on the other side of the square. Her vision is blocked. That's important. Age differences. We all know about these becoming more and more of an issue. Are some of the senses impaired? How is the energy level? How long since they were in a learning environment? What experiences do they bring to learning? That can be very important. So, final things here. Teachers reach students by learning how they learn. Observe the conditions that lead to success. Listen to the way a person communicates. Are they using I hear, I see, I feel? Experiment with various approaches. If one's not working, try something different. Don't just repeat again the one that didn't work. Focus on strengths. Once you've learned how they learn, use that knowledge and learn to recognize the various styles. And on the other side of that is, to be a successful learner, you have to know how you learn and translate. If somebody gives you information in a different way than you would like to receive it, you've got to translate it from one into the other. Make it right for you. Group things together so knowledge can be transferred. Apply a known concept to help you learn a related skill, and find ways to differentiate similar concepts. As Jerry said, experience error-free practice and avoid repeating mistakes. Okay, I have one last thing to say. We came in here, Jerry and Mike both said, I don't like to pass out handouts at the beginning. It's better at the end. And I said, I don't think so. Because as a visual learner, I want that handout in front of me so I know what it says and I can take appropriate notes if they're not on there. Those of you that aren't visual learners, it didn't hurt you to have this handout in your hand before you wanted it. But it definitely bothers those of us who are visual not to have it. Okay. Reach out to your students. Learn what they have to say. Make learning a good experience for them. That's entertainment. We got a question in the back. Jerry, do you want to go?
Scott Byers, Sacramento, California. Dottie, this is great stuff, and it's stuff that I spent years and years and years talking with Jack Murtha about, a lot of this stuff, who was a great mentor to me. But some of the stuff over the years, I've developed kind of a difference of opinion on some of this, if I may share that with you. One of these things, I believe that people are percentages of some of these things. For example, you asked how many are this. Well, I raised my hand on all of them because a percentage of me is part of all of these things. I am both. Well, the only thing I actually disagree with is the achievement, power, and social. I have a third objective. My objective is just to have a blast. I mean, honestly, that I don't care about power. Power doesn't matter to me. Unfortunately, I do this for a living, and I really don't care about the money. That doesn't matter to me either. Achievement, the only achievement I may have is seeing the dancers learn. That's the only achievement I may have. So I'm at a point in my life I don't care about any of those three things, really. Concrete and abstract. I'm a percentage of both of those. Whether I am sequential, and I am very random. You know, I'm all four of those. I'm a percentage of all four of those. Now, I may be a strange individual, but I'm a percentage of all of those. You didn't make mention to left brain, right brain dominance, and that has something to do with whether a person is left-handed or right-handed, because if they're left-handed, they're right brain dominant. If they're right-handed, they're left brain dominant, which is, more analytical, more that type of thing. Left brain is more, type of things. Great material, though, you've got here. This is wonderful stuff. On the inside, learning styles. There's, again, I'm a percentage of all of those, rather than just one learning style. And one of the things that I have observed over the years is that what you have under visual, I treat it as a separate and a fourth learning style. You have on the bottom, the last three ticks are take detailed notes, learn well from diagrams, and like to read themselves rather than be read. I treat that as a separate learning style. The reason is I know a lot of people who are visual learners that won't dare pick up a book. They don't care about books. They won't pick it up. So I treat those 3 tics as a separate learning style. And so what that does is kind of skew the percentages a little bit, because I call that a 4th learning style, which is those that learn by material. And that's even rarer than those that are kinetic learners. But, on that aspect. I don't know if you can talk to them.
Thanks, Scott. Almost everybody is some of this and some of that. But as you in a snap decision, most of you could make a decision that I'm more this than that. And certainly, I did say that in lots of cases you'd be too. And no doubt, we all can learn a little bit from each of those things. The left and right brain dominance. The original handout had another little page that got left off intentionally because I didn't think we needed to go there today, but I don't disagree.
Okay, Dave Holloway from Maui, and I'm also a teacher, long-time teacher of many classes as well as square dancing, and I'm glad Scott brought all that up, because when you teach a group of people, you're going to find people at one end of the spectrum, or like Scott, right in the middle with a balance of all, and you're going to see them. And so your job as a person, now we're all pretty good at sussing or reading a floor. And so that's what you want to do. Read your floor, read your people, talk to your people, get as much knowledge as you can so that you can do the best job that you can.
My name is Bruce Lowther. I'm from Salem, Oregon. One of the set of classes I teach is in a university town. In this class, I've run into several students who seem to have a problem with perception of what's going on around them. They know where they are, but they don't know where anybody else is in relationship to them. No matter what I do, they always have to be, they're lost. And I'm not sure how to address that, other than maybe making more emphasis on looking around to see other people, but I'm not sure that's the right response. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I guess my first reaction would be to kind of emphasize the formations for everybody, because all dancers need to develop that skill that after every call they're in a formation and they need to at some level recognize that formation. I mean, maybe not know exactly all the names for everything as we name them, but just to have that sense of where the formations are. And it sounds like, if I understand what you're saying correctly, that they're losing that sense of what their formation is, because you can't really do the next move unless you see where you are at the moment. And that's key. That's key, yeah. Either of you want to answer that?
No, that's fine. We have another question. I think Steve has
Stephen Cole from Renton, Washington. The question I have, as a teacher myself, as a new career, I just switched back in August. I've noticed in my day-to-day classes that I do have all 3 types of learners, or 4 if you want to parse it out. When I deal with Square Dance Land, I find I'm at a disadvantage because it's all lecture with some activity. I don't have the opportunity to add the reading person, the reading learner, the person that wants to read this stuff right away. And there are no materials outside that little sets and order book that may or may not be either current or in print or available. So I'm in the process of maybe trying to write up a few things for those people alone. Because if you hand a definition book to those guys and it's 50 pages long and you can't even fit a copy for my backpack, in my backpack for everybody, is there another method or is there another resource out there that I could use for that group alone?
I get that, Jiggery.
What I do, I purchase the illustrated handbooks. Palomino has them for sale. I purchase those and give those out to every class that I'm teaching. At some of the other programs that I teach, I have a weekly handout that I produce, and it has the definition of the call in there, and then I hand that out to the class as well. I am of the opinion, and this really gets into how we teach rather than how people learn, but providing the actual definition of a call to the dancers, even reading or in written form, I don't believe is important. What I believe is important is the translation of that into dosa-does so that the dancers understand the action that's going to be required rather than reading the definition. Granted, there are a certain number of people, a percentage of people, who desire to have the exact definition, and one of those learning styles, they have to know exactly what the words say. So my suggestion would be the illustrated handbooks. I find those very helpful. Or rather than handing out the entire definition, to create a lesson plan, as you were, for each lesson. That might help.
Certainly, for somebody that learns the way I do, there's a huge desire for that written information in your hand. No debate in my mind about that. And for the, it's exactly the same as having the piece of paper at the beginning or at the end. I want that, and I want it while I'm learning, because that is the way I learn. I take notes. You know why I take notes? Because I need to see it written down. Even if I never go back and read it again, I need to see it written on the paper.
Ruth Edison from Verona, New Jersey. We had a girl who made cards for herself, and she and her husband, and she would write down all the steps, all the things, and all the definitions, and she would test herself with them, with her husband, and she did very well. It really worked. Miracles.
Yeah, definitely. So if you have a student that's indicating a desire for written material, find a way to provide it. Certainly the books, they are still reasonably accurate. They're usable. They're the best thing we have at the moment.
Dick Lee, Rockwood, Cocoa, Florida, not Rockledge, right next door to Jerry. I find myself as a concrete random, okay? But I've also, during my life, I've been an airplane pilot, A&P mechanic, a welder, worked on the shuttle program for a number of years, built race cars. Mostly I just did that by, okay, I need to put this there, and did it randomly. But I also found that I had to train myself to follow blueprints, instructions, and you couldn't do that orally, or you had to do it visually, and you had to have the step-by-step instructions there. I was in quality control on the shuttle program. We had schedules we had to meet. I was in flight test and customer delivery with Boeing. We had schedules we had to meet. And it's just, you have to train yourself to be all of these things. You can't just, I held my hand up as a concrete random, but basically I've had to teach myself to do the other things. But by the same token, we're trying to learn to round dance. And I have a terrible time round dancing. So far it hadn't led to a divorce yet because we've only been married a couple of days. But anyway, I'm having a terrible time round dancing because there's no visual there. We have to listen to the instructor, and it's hard for me.
Yep. Certainly, knowing your own strengths, as I said, you need to find some way to convert what's happening. And let me follow up with the other aspect of this. When you're planning your lessons, people that need structure If you're not a person that needs that structure, if you're more a random person, people that need structure, they want 1 week's lesson to lead to the next, or one tips lesson to lead to the next tips lesson. There needs to be structure there for them. It's not going to bother the person that's random if you put that structure in. But if you don't put it in, those people that need it are going to be craving it.
That's a very good point. As long as we can do it without harming, that would be good. We do want to get Mike on. Scott, did you have something quick? Or? Oh, I didn't figure it would be. Thank you, Dottie. Extremely good information. And here's Mike. A nice welcome for Mike.
Thank you very much. See, we got a lot of first-timers here. How are the first-timers? Raise your hands. Give them a nice hand. Okay. There's, raise your hand again. We just kind of. All right. That's wonderful. How many here teach classes right now? How many here work for an executive club? It's not run by yourself, but it's run by officers. Okay. I just want to start out with something Jerry said about teaching to the local dance community of how the local dancers dance. I've been teaching a beginner's class every year since 1971, and I've worked for all that time for a couple of clubs that are run by officers. So those of us that teach for clubs that are run like that, we only have a certain amount of time that we can get through the calls. And so I share the same philosophy as Jerry does, that I don't teach things from a lot of different positions. I try to teach it so that when the people go out to another caller, local caller, and dance, that they'll be able to get through most of the things, or maybe a class dance that we have, or a local festival or something like that. Okay? And then after they get done with graduation, they get into some workshops and that. Eventually, they'll pick up some of these different things from some different positions. But you just don't have the time to teach DBD a lot in class. Okay. We mentioned the theme about our convention is entertainment. Well, learning is entertainment for a lot of people. They take lessons to learn something different, and this is part of their entertainment. Okay. When I was looking around to try to figure out, what I was going to say, I found a paper by John Cebulski, and the title was "What Makes Square Dancing Hard?" And I don't know where I got this from. I don't know if the Caller Lab might have this in their archives or something. But is it on the internet? Okay. Okay. It's a great thing because it takes a little different take from what Jerry and Dottie are saying about learning styles. This concentrates more on short-term memory, memory limits, and that type of thing. Okay? So when we talk about plateaus in learning, I'm sure you've all had the experience where you're running a class and nobody can do anything that night. It's just, So what do? You back off and you give them a nice dance and try not to teach anything new that night. Because the plateaus are stopping points, what the human mind can do. Okay? One of the things that I found that if I have a disastrous first tip in a class, I have a hard time recovering from it all night because they've lost confidence in themselves. So the first tip of a class is hugely important as far as I'm concerned. Wind in your face, easy type choreography. I don't even use what I've taught the week before in my first tip. All right. I just go on to the basics they already know. Nice singing call. This gives them confidence for the rest of the evening. If you don't, they break down the first tip a lot. Boy, you have a hard time recovering from that. Okay. Short-term memory is really important in learning. Okay, because every action that a person takes has to do with their short-term memory. And short-term memory doesn't mean just learning the call and knowing the call. The short-term memory deals with what the next call might be, maybe what the music is, what's going on in the square around them, if somebody's talking in the square. Okay, so there's only a certain amount of short-term memory that people have before the memory starts to overload. Okay? And studies have shown that there's a limit to how many things that we can keep in our short-term memory, maybe 5 to 7 things at the most. So in the next session, memory overload, when a call is too big to see, okay, all the dancers at once, the dancers start to experience this memory overload. And they start to fumble around the square. They're not sure where to go, okay? But with repetition, they try to make this big call into chunks. We've been talking about chunking a little bit, okay? Take the call spin, chain, through, okay? That's probably one of the longest calls that you teach in mainstream, spin, chain, through, all right? So the dancers will try to, as you explain it, try to put it into chunks, okay? When I teach spin, chain, through, I'll say it's like the first part of a spin the top. So what I try to do is build onto what they already know, okay? So I'll say, turn half by the right, ends, you're done. And that's very important you say that on a spin, chain, through. Ends, you're done, centers, and you go 3/4, half, 3/4, okay? But then they know that if it's like the first part of the spin the top, that's a chunk, okay? And it's easier to remember a chunk than it is all those calls. That's what I mean by chunking, okay? If they keep practicing the call, the chunks resolves itself into fewer and fewer parts, okay? And pretty soon, they're just aware of the call and they do it. So that's what we mean by memory overload. And to build a vocabulary of calls that are built onto the next call is very, very important. I'll do a lot of cast-off 3/4 from maybe an ocean wave or something like that before I teach spin the top. I'll do a lot of swing throughs from an Alamo ring before I do a swing through from an ocean wave. Okay, so you got to build on these things. Very important. Decision making. Okay, you can also have what we call decision overload. All right, so the caller says something, the dancer hears it, recognizes it, the dancer figures out what to do, the dancer does it, all in like a split second. Okay, so when the call is delivered, the dancer can't spend too much time, all right, thinking about all these things. Okay, and there's a limit to how fast you can make these type of decisions, okay? And if the more decisions that a dancer has to make in a given time, the more difficult the call gets and the more chance that the dancer will fall behind. So you got to be aware of both memory overload and decision overload as you're teaching, okay? The dancer has a sense of righteousness or rightness, okay? How many times, you leave somebody half sashayed and they'll try to fix it? How many times you leave people facing out and somebody eventually will start to turn around? You teach the call swing. First time you teach the call swing through, usually that end will turn around. Half by the right, centers half by the left. As soon as you go half by the right, the end starts to, what am I supposed to do? Okay, so you got to be aware of that. The dancer will have some type of a sense of rightness and try to fix things. All right. If a dancer senses something wrong, he'll try to fix it. Dancers will try and make mid-course directions that are not needed, and then the square will break down. Okay. Sometimes we get to anticipation. Anticipation can be good or it can be bad. All right. It can be bad if you use the same sequences over and over. Swing through, boys, run, flutter, wheel, sweep, a quarter. What happens is that will become a chunk in the dancer's memory, and pretty soon it'll be one call. Swing through, boys, run will seem like one call to him. Or flutter, wheel, sweep, a quarter will seem like one call to him, and it'll be a chunk. And it's very hard to have the dancer not do this unless you start varying your choreography a little bit, okay? If the dancer hears a particular sequence of calls enough times, he assumes that they're part of the grammar of square dancing, okay? That's bad anticipation. Good anticipation is giving the dancer a lot of confidence that he can anticipate something and let him relax a little bit. Like on your singing calls, there's nothing wrong with using the same figure 4 times in a row. People relax. They know what's coming, but that's all right. They go along, they're smooth dancing, they know the calls, they get more confident in themselves. So there's good anticipation, there's bad anticipation, and you got to make sure that you know the difference between each one. On the back of the sheet, dancers take clues from senses. Okay, joining hands, very important. Always say take hands. You know, you almost have to say that after every call, especially in the lines and ocean waves. Take hands. Centers take hands. You say head square through 4 hands, and you say touch a quarter. A lot of times centers don't take hands. Okay, you got to say it to them, and gradually after a while, then you can remove this. You know, take hands all the time. Body flow. All right, and this has to do a lot with your regular calling also. Say you do a reverse flutter wheel, a partner trade reverse flutter wheel. There's your body flow. If you say head couples reverse flutter, no body flow. Probably the square is going to have a lot of trouble with that. So make sure that when you're teaching your class and you're using your calls, that you use your body flow to help you teach. All right. Directional clues from the caller, helper words. You cannot have enough helper words. Okay. And gradually you can take those helper words away as you go along. Okay. Clues from other dancers in the square. You know, a lot of times the new dancer will watch what everybody else is doing in the square, and then, oh yeah, that's how it goes, and then they'll do it. So they take clues from dancers in the square. Talk about recall time. Okay. 3 things that John said in his paper. The less often a dancer has heard a call, the longer it takes them to react to it. If there are 2 calls that sound alike, it takes more time to decide between them which one is which. If there are 2 calls with similar definitions, it takes more time to make a decision on what to do. Okay, so you got to be aware of the dancer's recall time. Now, when I teach a class, it's usually a 2-hour class. And I call for a singles club. I teach their class Sunday nights. The class meets from 5 to 7, and then they have a half-hour rounds. And the club comes in and meets from 7:30 to usually 9:30. So I usually get quite a few angels to come in to help with the class, which can be good, can be bad. But the first tip, as I said before, I don't do anything that I did previous week. Just review what was taught last week. Second tip, I review just the calls that were taught in the last weekly session. Okay, so I'm building on this. Third tip is a teach. Fourth tip, I review that teach that I just did, along with using with the calls that we're already doing. Fifth tip is another teach. Sixth tip is a review teach of that particular that we did in the fifth tip. All right. So we're trying to build on that, not using too many calls. I don't like to teach. Once I get into the mainstream program, I don't like to teach more than 2 calls a night. Okay. The first part of your lessons, you know, the circles and the stars and do-si-do, swing, promenade, you can teach a lot of that stuff pretty easily and keep the dancer's interest. But when you start getting down that list, 2 calls a night I found is about all they can handle well. Okay. And I always try to make maybe every 10 weeks a night where we don't do any teaching, we just dance what we've already done, gives them a little confidence, give them a little review, give them a little sense of knowledge. Okay. So in talking about how people learn, okay, got to remember about short-term memory, of memory overload that they can experience. You got to remember about their decision making, how they're making decisions like in split seconds, decision overload. You got to remember that the sense that the dancer has to make things right when you're calling. You got to remember that when the dancer is approaching a discomfort level, you can almost tell that as you're calling along. Pretty soon they start fumbling around. Okay. You got to remember about anticipation. It can be good. It can be bad. You got to also remember the clues that the dancers get from their own senses, from their own dancing from their square, and the dancer recall time. And that's my presentation. So.
Thank you, Mike. Very good. As Mike was giving his presentation there, a couple of thoughts came to mind again from the work that John Sobalski had done in talking about chunks and the way that people learn, especially the complex calls, not necessarily complex calls, but the way people learn is in chunks. Like when they first learn right and left through, and they'll learn this in this way, and they will concentrate on right hand pull by, and then we'll do they'll reach out with the boys out with their right hand, and they'll courtesy turn the girl, and they'll think about all of that as they're learning, and then pretty soon all of those actions become one thing, and that one thing is a right and left through, so that they practice, they learn it that way, and then they learn that when they hear right and left through, they give a right hand pull by, courtesy turn, they're all done. And it works like that for I believe it works like that for every call. They learn pieces at a time. Even a call, well, not even, but a call as complex as relay the deucey. They learn each piece individually. And then they put the whole picture, if they dance it enough, then it all becomes one chunk of information. So then they hear the call, and when they first hear relay the deucey, they are concentrating. They go half right, the left three-quarter, or they're circulating around the outside, they're going through that wave, and then they finish up, and there they are. Eventually, as they learn more and more through the repetition, that relay the deucey, the half right, and the wave, and the circulates, all becomes one thing. And that one thing is relay the deucey. And I've experienced this, and I'm sure that y'all have. That's a Florida term, by the way, y'all. In fact, all y'alls have experienced this, where a dancer will come up and they'll say, you know that call where you turn this way, and then you turn that way, and then you say, swing through? No, that's not it. Then you say, spin the top? Yeah, that's it. Because they have reduced all of those parts into one chunk of thing. And they certainly know how to do it, and they can react. But and I believe that's one of the major differences between callers and dancers, is that we learn it as a chunk too when we're dancing, but we retain the individual pieces, so that we're not caught in that situation where a dancer comes up and says, you know that relay the deucey thing that you asked us to do? And you say, yeah. And can you tell me how that's done? And you better be able to say, recall all those pieces, and then put the pieces together. Okay. So that was part of what John Sobalski's work was, and John was a fantastic person for many, many things, and his teaching and study of how people learn was one of those great things.
Jerry said something about the beginning about demos using just two couples. If you have a call that just has two couples involved, like recycle or spin the top or something like that, just use two couples, because it's a lot easier for the folks to see two couples rather than a whole square. Okay, and I use demos a lot. Almost every tip I'll have, say, can I have some club members come up and we'll demonstrate something like that. But if it has to do with two couples, just use the two couples.
Don Thompson, Paradise, California. With all the foregoing being said, I'd love to hear you all three of you put comments, the age bias on the learning.
Don is asking us to comment on the age bias, is the word he used, and maybe some clarification. You mean having youth and older people in the same square, or?
Paradise, Northern California, is a retirement community. A lot of people with changing learning capabilities?
I understand. My belief is that in the older people, unless they are suffering from some dementia or some reduced mental capability, perhaps a stroke or something like that, if that's not the case, I believe that the primary gap, the difference between how younger people can learn and older people can learn, is that in many cases, the younger people are in a learning environment all day long. So they are in tune to listening and hearing and concentrating on what's being said. Our older people are not in a learning environment. They're perhaps worried about where the mortgage money is going to come from, or I've got a doctor's appointment next week and my knee is hurting, and those types of things which need to be done away with. I think that's my feeling is that that's one of the biggest reasons, although reduced mental capacity certainly would be more. Dottie?
I certainly agree with what Jerry's saying about the learning environment and where they are. Are they currently learning? Have they reasonably learned how to learn, or have they forgotten how to learn? In which case, initially coming in as a new square dancer, if they haven't been learning anything new, then they have to remember how they learned something. They have to go through that process. Okay. There's other issues, and obviously as people get older and there's the beginning of less ability to learn, well, that's another issue. But we've had some sessions that address that. We've got questions in the back here.
I was just going to say, I think you have to have a lot more repetition for older people. I have a senior group on Monday afternoons. The gentleman's 95. His partner's going to turn 92. And they can really they can load the boat just like anybody else can. But when you're teaching older people, I think there's a lot more repetition that you have to do than maybe younger people.
I think another big, this is Bruce Lowther, Salem, Oregon. I think another big piece of it is the fatigue factor. Younger persons have more energy. Learning takes energy. And so as you get with the older folks, they get tired sooner. And as soon as they start getting tired, you can see it. They start wandering around and floundering a little more, and they need a break.
Very excellent point. And I know that personally, dealing with my older groups, I make sure that I don't run on. Once through the record, I got to teach whatever I want to teach in once through the record. And that's it. What they've learned at that point, that's where we stop.
Speaking to Jerry's point about how people learn incrementally, I would agree that there are some people who do learn that way. But having dealt with a lot of other dance forms, I can tell you that there is a very large population out there that learns patterns, not pieces. They learn patterns. And this is a very popular way to learn. And one of the things that I would love to know is which is the larger population. My gut feeling tells me that the larger population are the ones that learn patterns. In other words, they learn a whole string of stuff and put it together. And only when we are very careful to concentrate on the individual pieces do they suddenly go, oh my gosh, that's a right and left through. Because if you teach right and left through with a static square, and you put them in facing lines and do right and left through, it is an entirely different figure to them. And it's a figure to them because they haven't gotten the point that the right and left through is face the opposite couple, pull by, courtesy turns. It's a whole pattern. And as soon as you change the environment or the formation, then it's a new figure to most people.
That was Calvin Campbell.
Charles Crockett from Crowley, Texas.
My mentor once told me that if someone is not learning to square dance, it is the instructor's fault. That he's just not explaining it the correct way. But we've all known people that have been through 10 sets of lessons that are just not getting it.
I agree with almost all of that. The exception would be the person who does have a reduced mental capability of through a stroke or dementia or something like that. But certainly it is the instructor's job, I believe, to make sure that everybody knows and learns. And it may take more than one time through. Dave, and then we'll get back to, is that Scott back there?
Yeah, Dave Fullaway from Maui. Along with patterns is music. Long-term memory and short-term memory are all tied in. When you get older people, they remember certain things for a longer period of time, and with groups of older people, I would use the same music for the same call because it's a pattern. Just because if you can use that song, use that because they've learned it, they've got the pattern, they can dance it next week and the next week and the next week. In classes, if you're having trouble with continuing, I would use the same music that you use for your teach, I would use for the review. Not every time, but more times than not. And then for your teach, I would put on new music. And then the next time you do review, I'd use the music you use for that teach. And what you're doing is you're developing a long-term memory thing on which you can hang on new short-term information.
Scott will have something here in a minute, too. And remember, we're about 13 minutes out, and if you need the handouts, put your name in the email, and we'll go for it. Mike has a quick comment.
Just about the music. This could be another topic altogether, but the music you use affects how people learn. I mean, if you're teaching a call that's kind of difficult and you put on music that's, kind of busy, rock and this, it's going to agitate people, okay? You got to use music has good beat, soft, not a lot of melody to it, okay? And save the rock stuff and that for like the last tip or something when you want people to have a good time.
Before Scott steps in, we have drifted into teaching, and on the CALLERLAB website there's a document, Teaching Techniques, which I would highly recommend we get a hold of. And here's Scott.
I'm one of those people that believe that if my dancers can't dance, that's my fault. And I believe that there's always a reason why someone can't learn. It might be a physical problem. It might be a hearing problem. And I try to determine what the problem is. Recently, I ran into a situation where a gentleman was having trouble with Alzheimer's. Can't do anything about that. Someone that has Parkinson's disease. Do you know that if they have Parkinson's disease, it causes their brain to stop? So if you see someone that's older that's dancing and all of a sudden they don't move, they stop, chances are they have Parkinson's disease and their medication isn't right. Okay? So I'm always looking for what is the reason behind it. Certain things I can't help. I can't help it if they have Alzheimer's. I can't do anything about that. I can help them if they have a hearing problem because I carry hearing enhancement with me. And I say, here, do this. Okay, those are some of the things. What Cal said about the people, some people learn by a whole bunch of things, I call that a large chunk. I call that a large chunk. What he was saying over here in his handout, his is the end result of what her handout is. Her handout is the why his works. So if you look at both of those as a piece as that works, they're both fabulous stuff.
Thank you. Ron?
Ron Black, Los Angeles. Thank you very much. For those of you out there who are teaching, the students out there depend upon you. I am shepherding a lady through a class who has been a school teacher for 37 years. She is very bright, very intelligent. She teaches line dancing. There is nothing wrong with her capacity to learn, except the caller at this one particular club relies on the angels to fill in the gaps. He doesn't take the time to go out and actually teach the end result of a square through. I'm sorry. They put the speaker on your end. When I teach a square through, heads walk in, turn, face your corner. This is where a basic square through ends. I want them to know where it ends. Not how to get there. I want them to know where it ends. We can get to how they're later, but they got to know where they're going. A right and a left through from columns. Heads square through 4, do a right and a left through. The natural intent of the outside person as they pull by, there's a person coming at them. That's where they're going. You have to teach the people where they're going. This woman finally gave up square dancing in class and quit. I took her to another caller who specifies where you're going to be. She has quit the first class entirely and now drives 30 miles across Los Angeles to go to another caller who cares about where you're supposed to be. We'll get to it about how you get there, but where you're supposed to be. She is exceedingly happy with this caller and will go on to be a very good square dancer. The other caller, she will never go back to.
Thank you, Ron.
Bob Amesbury, Spokane, Washington. And what Ron said, we're all teachers, and we need to be, in my opinion, better teachers. That's probably why we're here. A few years ago, in Spokane, Washington, just think of this as yourself. If you teach a class, after that class graduates, for 1 year, they have to wear a badge that says, Bob Amesbury taught me to dance. And they're out in here. And I actually, 3 or 4 of my students did that 1 year. You will be a better teacher. I can't teach everybody. I know that. I'll work hard at it, but you can't. But think about yourself saying, okay, for 1 year in this area, everybody's going to wear a badge of where they come from. You all know who taught who and who did, but it will make you a better teacher.
Hi. Kenny Ferris from Laurel, Maryland. Probably 35 or more years ago, Lee Kopman was at the Washington, D.C. area convention and did a callers clinic. And of all the sessions I've sat at and callers things all the years, this little, sometimes you remember one little moment. He said, not everybody can learn how to square dance. Boy, up till that point in time, I thought, everybody should. Don't you want everybody to square dance? I mean, I want to share it. He said, everybody can't square dance. Everybody can't bowl. And it really got me to thinking. I'm still not sure how I feel about that, but it's something to consider that maybe everybody can't square dance. Some people just don't have the whatever. They just don't get it, and usually they figure that out on their own, and you don't see them anymore. But just it's a sad thought, but maybe everybody can't square dance.
Karen Herr from Colorado. I'm an educator by profession, so I'm listening to it as an educator. You guys have hit some wonderful points. You've got to remember that as a learner, everybody learns a different way, but a piece that's missing is, and it's your whole theme. It's your whole theme is as a learner, you're going to learn twice as much, twice as fast if they have a smile on their face, if they're having fun, and somehow give them that fun because they go, oh, I can do this if they're smiling. If they're frowning and they're working too hard, they're going to walk away and say, I work for 8 hours a day. I don't need to go and work at night or do that too. So remember that entertainment piece, because that's huge as a learner, as a teacher, and all of that. The other piece, you hit it a little bit, but it's also called progression, and it's building on something they already know. It's not just teach them this, but say, okay, this is like. And it hits those kinesthetic learners. I mean, I remember learning Relay the Deucey, and I'm going, I don't get this. Until somebody on the sideline when I was at dance said, where's Lucy? And all of a sudden it went, where's Lucy? I'm looking for Lucy. So sometimes it's connecting them to something they know. When we teach, because we're round dancers, and we teach a windmill, it's like an airplane, and you relate it to something that's kinesthetic. And those are going to hit those kinesthetic learners by relating it to something concrete for them to hang on to. Sometimes we forget about that piece. We leave that, we think doing is it, but sometimes it's relating it to something concrete.
Yeah, you need that, exactly as she's saying. You need, for some people, they have to have the verbal description, the mental image in their mind of what it's like. I also want to just add something that I was thinking about here. Square dancing is a wonderful thing for the teacher. As somebody that taught mathematics, and you don't get to see what's going on until the papers come to you, square dancing gives you instant feedback. If you haven't described it properly, you know pretty quickly, and you better take the blame yourself. It's not their fault. It's yours.
Remember, the CALLERLAB teaching list is a recommended order. You might have something that works better for you. Don't feel as though you have to do every of those calls right in order. If you find something that works better for you, just make sure that you cover the calls on the list. Okay? So don't think you have to use it in order like it is.
Kent Forrester, Silver Spring, Maryland, and Kenny Ferris taught me to dance. He's not smiling. I've got 2 points, and they're interrelated. Yes, everybody learns in different ways, but the best thing you can do as a teacher is learn to teach in different ways. Don't always teach the call the same way. For example, one of our teachers always insists on, when you're teaching square through, you put a chair in the middle of the square and they have to go around it. That works for some. Some, the definition works. There have been some that it didn't click until I just took them aside and said, look, it's like a miniature right and left grand in the middle of the square. But that image clicked to them where the definition and going around a chair didn't. And the most important thing that I have found in teaching is team teaching. Teach with another person. Don't always teach with the same person. And learn from how they teach. And let them learn from how you teach. And it's extremely valuable to me.
Very good. Wonderful points all. And we're really at the end of our session. We want to thank Dottie and Mike. Nice. We especially want to thank you for being here. I think that being here shows that you share our hopes to become better teachers, and our goal was to provide you some tools to do that, and we certainly hope that we did. Thank you very much for being here, and have a good lunch.